Be me, 20-year-old feminist junior at State University studying sociology major, taking required business communications class for my degree need to graduate. Professor is older, man maybe 55, been teaching for decades, experience. First day of class, he seems nice enough traditional teaching style lecture. Goes over syllabus expectations and grading policy standard stuff for course. Notice he uses phrase you guys when addressing the class mixed gender. Raise my hand and interrupt to tell him that's gendered language exclusionary. He looks confused and says, sorry, habit. I'll try to say everyone instead. Feel satisfied that I corrected him on first day setting tone early. Other students look uncomfortable, but I tell myself someone has to speak up. Second class, he's lecturing about professional communication in workplace settings. Says something about how businessmen need to communicate effectively with clients clearly. Immediately raise my hand and say, businessmen is gendered. What about businesswomen? He stops mid-sentence and says, you're right. Business professionals is better term. Corrects himself and continues with lecture using gender-neutral language now. Notice he seems slightly annoyed, but I'm pleased he's learning from correction. Classmate next to me whispers that I should let him teach without interruptions. Tell her that language matters and excluding women matters too. Need accountability. She rolls her eyes and goes back to taking notes, ignoring me. Professor continues, but I can tell he's being more careful with word choices. Third class, and he's discussing email etiquette in professional settings now. Mentions something about chairman of company and board members communicating effectively. Raise my hand again and point out chairman is gendered, should be chairperson. He sighs and says, yes. Thank you for the correction. I appreciate feedback. But notice he seems more frustrated than grateful for my input this time. Another student raises hand and asks if we can please just continue lesson. Professor agrees and says he'll be more mindful of language going forward. Spend rest of class listening for any gendered language to correct more. Catch him saying mankind once and interrupt to say humankind is better term. He corrects himself without acknowledging me, just continues teaching, ignoring now. Week 2, and I'm raising my hand multiple times each class session regularly. Every time he uses gendered language, I interrupt to provide correct alternative. He says, you guys, I say you, all or everyone is better inclusive. He says manpower. I say workforce or staff is more appropriate instead. He says freshman. I say first-year student is the proper term now. Other students are getting visibly annoyed with my constant interruptions during lecture. One guy tells me to shut up and let professor teach we're paying. Tell him that inclusive language is part of professional communication. Ironically, professor tells us both to settle down and respect classroom environment. Please, continue my corrections because I believe this is important educational moment. Professor starts looking exhausted every time I raise my hand during class. Can tell he's trying to catch himself before using gendered terms now, but decades of habit make him slip up regularly. Still mistakes happening. Every time he does, I'm there to correct him immediately without fail. He says, Congressman, I correct to Congress, person publicly in front of everyone. He says, policeman, I correct to police officer for gender neutrality always. He says, spokesman. I correct a spokesperson because language matters, representation. Notice other students have stopped participating in class discussions entirely now. They just sit silently while I engage in language corrections constantly daily. Professor mentions that class participation has dropped significantly lately concerning him. Third week and he starts class with announcement about classroom conduct rules. Says that while he appreciates feedback, there's appropriate time and place. Mentions that constant interruptions are disrupting learning environment for everyone. Tells class that he's trying his best to use inclusive language. Asks if we can please save language feedback for office hours instead. Feel offended because I'm just trying to help him be better teacher. Raise my hand and say that gendered language can't wait. Needs immediate correction. He says he understands my concern, but other students need to learn too. Tell him they can't learn if they're learning from gendered language examples. He looks frustrated and says, we'll discuss this after class privately, please. After class, he asks me to stay and talk about the interruptions. Tells me he values inclusive language, but my corrections are a disruptive pattern. Says other students have complained about not being able to focus learn. Mentions that I've interrupted class over 40 times in 3 weeks count. Tell him that's because he keeps using gendered language, needs correction badly. He says he's working on it, but change takes time and patience needed. Tell him that women have been patient for centuries and I won't anymore. He says this isn't about patience, it's about classroom management and learning. Asks me to please write down corrections and give them after class. Refuse and say gendered language needs to be corrected in moment happens. 4th week and I'm still interrupting every class multiple times daily. Professor has started ignoring my raised hand, continuing with lecture anyway. Start just calling out corrections without being acknowledged by him first. He says mankind. I yell out humankind from my seat loudly, interrupting. He says, you guys. I yell everyone without raising hand anymore now. Other students are openly annoyed. Some have started sitting far from me. One girl moved seats specifically to get away from my area section. Guy behind me asks Professor if he can switch to different section. Professor tells him all sections are full, but understands his frustration clearly. Realize other students see me as problem, not as ally helping everyone. Professor sends me email asking for meeting during his office hours. Go to meeting, and he has department chair there too, official now. They tell me my behavior is creating hostile learning environment for others. Say that multiple students have complained about my constant interruptions disrupting. Tell them I'm just advocating for inclusive language, which should be standard. Department chair says advocacy is good, but method is problematic for classroom. Explains that disrupting class 50-60 times over 4 weeks is excessive amount. Tells me I need to find different way to advocate without disrupting. Suggests maybe professor should just use correct language from the start then. They both look tired and tell me this is formal warning about conduct. Continue correcting him, despite warning, because principle matters more than rules. 5th week, and he's clearly trying even harder to avoid gendered language, but still makes mistakes occasionally because decades of habit formed strongly. Every single time I call it out immediately in front of class loudly. He's stopped acknowledging my corrections at all, just continues teaching, ignoring. Other students have started groaning audibly when I interrupt, now openly annoyed. One student told me to shut the fuck up during class outburst. Professor had to stop and address the outburst, spent 10 minutes calming. Tell professor that students' reaction proves how much sexism in class exists. He says no. It proves that you're disrupting everyone's education severely badly. Midterm exam comes, and I answer questions using only gender-neutral language. Where professor used gendered examples, I wrote corrections in margins notes, added footnotes about why his language choices were problematic and exclusionary, returned exam with lower grade than expected because didn't follow instructions. He wrote note that exam questions needed to be answered as asked. Told me that correcting exam questions instead of answering them cost points. Go to his office hours to argue about grade given unfairly biased. He shows me rubric and explains I didn't actually answer several questions. Tell him I was making important point about his gendered language on exam. He says the point cost you 15 points off your grade as stated. 6th week and other students are openly hostile toward me now completely. They make comments about the crazy feminist girl who won't shut up. One group moved their entire study session when I tried to join them. Realize I'm becoming isolated in class, but tell myself they're just ignorant. Professor has started recording his lectures and posting them online now. Mentions that students who prefer can watch lectures without disruptions. Alternative. Realize this is because of me, but spin it as positive accommodation. Tell myself I'm creating change, even if people don't appreciate it yet. But notice attendance has dropped significantly, many watching online instead now. Only about half the class shows up in person anymore, the rest remote. 7th week and department chair attends our class, sitting in back, observing. Professor teaches very carefully using gender-neutral language entire time perfectly. I still find one instance to correct, when he says you guys addressing group, raise my hand and loudly correct him in front of department chair witnessing. Department chair writes something down, in notebook taking notes, observing behavior. After class, I'm called a meeting with both of them, again, serious. They tell me I'm being placed on academic probation for disruptive behavior. Say that, despite warning, I've continued to disrupt class education for everyone. Tell them I'm exercising my right to advocate for inclusive language speech. They say I have right to advocate, but not to prevent others learning. Continue going to class, but now I'm being watched closely by Professor. He's using gender-neutral language almost perfectly, now learned, finally corrected. But I still find occasional slips to correct during lectures, happening rarely. Each time I do, other students openly sigh or groan, frustration audible. One student raised hand and asked Professor to please remove me from class. Professor said he can't do that, but understands their frustration with situation. Student said she's paying tuition to learn, not listen to interruptions constantly. Tell her she should be grateful. Someone is advocating for her representation. She says she doesn't need me to advocate, she needs to pass class. Professor asks us both to focus on course material, not each other. 8th week, and I'm called to Dean's office with formal complaint filed. Multiple students signed petition asking for me to be removed from class. They documented every interruption I made over 8 weeks' detailed list. Dean shows me list of 73 documented interruptions in 8 weeks' timeline. Tells me this is creating hostile learning environment for 35 other students. Tell Dean I'm advocating for women's inclusion through language which matters. Dean says method matters too, and my method is preventing others from learning. Tells me I'm being removed from class and will receive failing grade. Feels shocked and betrayed that I'm being punished for advocating for women. Dean says I can retake class next semester with different approach required. Appealed the decision to Academic Review Board, hoping to overturn failing grade. Bring all my notes about professor's gendered language as evidence supporting. Review Board listens to my case and to testimonies from other students. Students testify that they couldn't focus or learn because of my interruptions. Professor testifies that he tried to accommodate me, but I wouldn't compromise. Department chair testifies about warnings and attempts to find middle ground solution. Review Board upholds decision. Saying my behavior prevented educational environment functioning. Tell them this is discrimination against feminist activism in classroom space. They say it's not about feminism, it's about 73 documented disruptions of class. Failing grade stands on my transcript permanently, they're recorded always. Have to retake class next semester with different professor, new start. New professor is woman, in her 40s, uses inclusive language naturally throughout. Realize I have nothing to correct because she's already doing everything right. Feel frustrated because I can't participate in same way as before now. Other students from previous class warn new classmates about me, apparently spreading. Notice people avoid sitting near me and professor watches me carefully, warily. Behave perfectly in this class, don't interrupt once entire semester through. Get A in the class, but realize it's because I had nothing to fight. Previous failing grade still on transcript, affecting my GPA permanently damaged done. Need to explain to graduate schools why I failed business communications class. Apply to grad schools and have to address the failing grade in applications. Explain that I was advocating for inclusive language, but it sounds weak. Admission committees seem concerned about my ability to work in academic environment. One interviewer asks if I would disrupt graduate seminars the same way. Tell them no, but can tell they're skeptical of my answer, don't believe. Get rejected from top 3 graduate programs applied to for sociology. Acceptance letter from safety school mentions concern about classroom behavior issues. Realize the failing grade has labeled me as difficult student permanently now. Tell myself I was standing up for what's right, but cost me opportunities. Wonder if there was better way to advocate that wouldn't have failed class. Year later, and still dealing with consequences of that semester damage. GPA dropped significantly because of failing grade, hard to explain away. Lost scholarship because GPA fell below minimum requirement needed to keep. Had to take out additional loans to finish degree because lost funding. Some professors have heard about me and watch me carefully in classes. Realize I've gotten reputation as that student who disrupts classes constantly. Tell myself it was worth it for the principal but struggling financially. The professor I corrected has actually improved his language use significantly. Here he now teaches session on inclusive language to other faculty members. Realize he learned and changed, but I'm the one with failing grade. Graduate with degree but lower GPA than expected because of that semester. Job applications ask about academic record and that F grade stands out. Have to explain in interviews why I failed business communications course. Tell them about advocating for inclusive language, but employers seem concerned. One interviewer said, they need someone who can work within system effectively. Another said, they worry about me disrupting workplace with constant corrections. Realize the failing grade has become red flag for potential employers viewing. Tell myself, I stood up for my values but struggling to find employment. Finally get job offer, but it's lower position than degree qualifies for. Supervisor mentions during onboarding that she values team cohesion and cooperation. Still believe in inclusive language, but realize my approach was counterproductive. Could have volunteered to give presentation on inclusive language to class. Could have written paper about gendered language in business communications topic. Could have worked with professor privately to help him improve over time. Instead, I disrupted 73 classes and failed course achieving nothing, really. Professor learned eventually, but not because of my interruptions, because embarrassment. Other students resented me, and probably associate feminism with being annoying. Lost scholarship opportunities and job prospects over failing grade permanent record. Tell myself I was right, but being right didn't make my approach effective. Learn that how you advocate matters as much as what you advocate for.